Hi everyone, this is Susan. I just wanted to make some announcements before we get started. So the first one is that I hope that everyone had a good time at Housing California. If you guys went to any sessions and you have information that you want to share or materials that you want to share, we do have a place on Lighthouse. It's the training topics discussion, and it's on the training portion of our Lighthouse page. You can actually add your comments. You can attach documents to that comment that you have on there as well. So we invite everybody to go ahead and add your comments and share information about interesting sessions that you attended. The second announcement that I have is that next week we are getting ready to roll out our new Integratech database, which we have renamed My Data, which stands for MidPenn Integratech Data. The trainings are next Tuesday and Wednesday from 10 to 3. If you have not signed up for a session yet, please make sure that you sign up by the end of today so that we can get you the invites. Lunch will be catered. Please make sure to bring your laptops as well. The last thing that I have is that the updated signature matrix is now available on Lighthouse. There's two versions of the signature matrix. One is the marked up version with all of the updates, and that one's going to be there for a few months, and then we're going to remove it after the transition period. There's also a clean copy on there, so if you have not seen the signature matrix yet, if it's new to you, then please refer to that clean copy.
And I think your directors will be talking to you about the signature matrix as well, because there are changes on there that we want to make sure everybody understands and is going to work within.
Yeah, and if you have any questions, refer to talk to your directors about it. They're the experts. And those are all the announcements that I have. I'm going to go ahead and just pass it over to Alice.
Okay. Well, this is a very scintillating topic, of course. It's pretty dense. So I do have some prizes today, okay? We're going to do one prize after a break, and we'll do one prize at the end to keep you here till the end. And I got a little game to play that we're going to do with our prizes. So I also have to say that I didn't really get a chance, because there's been so much going on, to really prepare for this until last night. Fortunately, the good news is that I have been preparing my whole career for this. So I pretty much can wing it. But there may be a few points in here where we're winging it a little bit. And so what we're going to talk about is kind of a bigger picture of how to negotiate with an investor to get the terms we want and need, and how do you do that, and what are the terms that we want and need. And so let's see, let me make this clicker work. Hello, did somebody say something? No, okay. So when we're negotiating an equity agreement, this is a complicated financial agreement. It's going to outline all of the responsibilities of each party, what all of the financial arrangements are, and how the partnership is going to function for the next 15 years, and how we're going to end the partnership. So there's a lot in there, and it's a lot of stuff that's going to last for a long time, so we need to get it right. And so having this idea of having preferred terms, there's a lot of reasons why that makes sense. One is so that we can tell our investors and lenders what it is we want, because we have a lot better chance of getting what we need if we tell them what that is. And so we can give it to our financial consultants so they know what it is that we want and need. They're useful because now project managers can know what they are, and you can learn what they are, so that's what we're doing today. They're really useful to use as a guide when you're negotiating with your investor, because you can say, hey, here's, oh right, I need to try to get this. So it's a good reminder to everybody. It's really helpful when you're negotiating the specific language in the LPA. And it's good for management review, because now we know we have something to compare against as to whether we got what it is that we wanted. And we do that, the tool we use is the term sheet, our term sheet form. And so that is useful because it can be used by the project manager to see if what, as it's sort of a checklist, management and our internal partners when we're reviewing the documents. So it's a nice way of summarizing what the terms are. And it's a good check sheet for you guys as you're reviewing the documents. And it's helpful to have if you have to transition the project. So those are all some of the reasons why we do that. See, I'm trying to fit this into the purposeful procedures so you guys know why we're doing things. But a few cautions about it is if the term sheet is relied on as a checklist, then you might just not look at everything else. So just remember, it's a tool, but that doesn't substitute for you actually reading the document, because there could be additional things in there that they have that we want to be paying attention to. Another thing is that the preferred terms are complicated and they're difficult to summarize. They're subject to sort of project specific. So that's why we're having this training. But also, some of these things are hard. So don't feel like you just because it's written down, you should know. Absolutely means you should know it. And don't feel like you failed if we don't get all the preferred terms. Some of these are things we probably do expect to get. Some of them are maybe slightly aspirational. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And lastly, the language in the LPA is really complex, particularly the option to right of first refusal. So as you're filling out the term sheet, there's a lot of nuanced language in there. So summarizing it sometimes doesn't really do the trick. It'll give a basic idea, but it doesn't, I think on some of this language, it doesn't really substitute for really, like for my review, actually reading it myself. So the, one of the things I think that's really, that we need to think about when we're talking about negotiating these things is we're really negotiating it over a series of steps. And so one of the things I really want you to take away from this is that when we put together an investor RFP and send it out, that's the first step of the negotiation, and that's a really important step, how you do that. That's a strategic step in the negotiation, because that's where, again, we want to tell them what we want in order to get what we want. And so we're telling them what we want both in our RFP form. So for those of you who haven't gone through this process, we send out an RFP to lenders. Now, this process may change as we're entering into this different market with investors. So we may be doing less RFPs and more just direct negotiations. But the concept remains the same. That what we're going to give to the investors, either as a group in an RFP or individually to a specific investor, is saying this is what we want. So what we give them needs to already incorporate our preferred terms into it. And there's some things that are in the numbers and some things that, preferred terms that aren't. So it's not like it's covering everything, but there's some things that it is. So, so that's sort of the first stage of this negotiation. And we'll talk a little bit about that more as we go through the term sheet, what things are really getting set up in the projections. And then, when we select the investor, that is when we have the maximum leverage to negotiate what we want. And once because they're going to agree to do things in order to get selected as the investor. So that's when we really want to get nailed down any important terms. So, just going back a step too, is when you're sending out the RFP, again, this is where, during this stage, we want to make sure that we're highlighting issues that are going to be part of this negotiation. Again, because it's during this stage we have the most leverage. So if there's something that's kind of a problem with the project, we're better off most likely letting them know at the beginning so we can negotiate that into the deal, whatever the thing is, as opposed to later when we have less leverage over getting them to do what we want. Because once we sign the LOI and we're in the closing process, it's much harder to just say, okay, take a walk, because we have timing issues of we need them to be there. So we wanted to kind of do those more tricky negotiations while we have more leverage. So in the RFP, we want to make sure we're thinking strategically about what we do want to disclose and what we don't want to disclose. There may be some things we don't want to disclose that are better off left to later, and some things that are really better to disclose up front. So then we're going to be working on this letter of intent. And that's going to be really, a lot of that is setting up the financial agreements between the parties. So that's where, but we're not necessarily going to get into all of the details. We're going to set the basic terms that are going to serve this partnership. And then the partnership agreement is the final phase of this negotiation, and that's where we are really either modifying some of those financial terms if things have changed, and or really negotiating all of the real legal language. And so that means that at the LOI stage, who's doing the negotiating is really going to be, you know, you as the project manager and your project management team, your director, me, and your financial consultants are going to be the ones that are going to be most involved in those negotiations. Legal counsel is sometimes important if a legal issue comes up, and it's good to have them review the LOI, but they're not necessarily a big part of the negotiating team at that stage. Whereas when we're doing the partnership agreement, they're really, your legal counsel is going to be at the center of the negotiations then. They're a much more important part of the negotiating team at that point. So any thoughts or questions about that so far? Okay, this is all just kind of setting it up, how to think about it. And you know, this is, again, this is where I think about things, is try to thinking, this is a negotiation, and always think about it as a negotiation, and when do I have leverage? How can I maximize that and get what I want while I still have the power of selection? Now, again, all this could change in this equity market. We may have less negotiating ability. And so some of these preferred terms that we've been getting, we'll talk about this, maybe we aren't going to get them in the next year. It remains to be seen. But we still want to go in with the idea that we can. Because we're Mid-Penn. Yeah. Everybody loves us. Everybody wants to work with us. Take that view into your negotiation. So just talking about the purposeful procedures, just to be clear about this, about Mid-Penn process. So we have the term sheet, and that's what we're going to start looking at. The term sheet is designed to be done in 2 stages because it's a 2-step negotiation. So the first step is the LOI stage. So you need to complete, and it's designed, and it says within the form which things need to be done at the filled out at the LOI stage and which ones at the LPA stage. So at the LOI stage, you're going to fill out all the LOI ones, and it needs to be approved by me before you can get your LOI signed by Jan. And then at the LPA stage, you can take the same term sheet and just modify anything that has changed in the financial terms and add the new information that's in the LPA. And again, it needs to be signed by me before the equity documents can be signed. Is that clear, everybody? Yeah, Abby.
Well, so one thing I've noticed is that different investors have different detail on term sheets. So some, like Wells Fargo, have a very detailed term sheet, which does make it easier to, you know, create your draft the LPA. Other investors, like Union Bank, for example, are a little lighter on the term sheet. So when you're looking at the term sheet at the LOI stage, you're kind of aware of the fact that some details may be already out there and some may not, depending on the investor when you're
Absolutely. Reviewing? So, I mean, I think most of them, we want to have most of the information that is marked in the term sheet as being at the LOI stage. And if we don't, that may be something that we have to follow up on to get that detail. So we need to know it is what, let's go ahead and have that negotiation now. I think it's really mainly Union Bank that doesn't go into quite enough detail, and I think we've, worked around that and or, know what, we've also done so many deals with them, we know what their LPA is going to say. But it is important, I think, sometimes to have those conversations. Yeah, thanks. Okay, so now we're going to turn to the term sheet. So I'm going to go ahead and, you know what, can I work off of a printed copy? I think that might be a little easier for me. And then for those of you, you have printed copies in front of you, and for those of you outside of who aren't here in person, you have two screens. Pull up the term sheet that I sent out, and for those of you, if you don't have two screens, just have it ready to look at. Okay. Well, I kind of want to put my PowerPoint up to help me guide me. Yeah, question?
Oh yeah, just to clarify, we're looking at the term sheet for the LOI right now, or during that time?
Either one doesn't matter. It could be either the LOI or the LPA one. I think I sent out the LPA one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. So first off, thanks to Nasreen and Victoria for having such well-organized documents. That's why I chose Sequoia Belhaven, is I went to go find them. And I looked at a couple others first, and then Sequoia Belhaven. Everything was right exactly where it should be. So it was really easy to find everything. Thank you. And then the other thing that I found out yesterday, as I was trying to prepare for this, was that this document does not actually exist on Lighthouse, and it also doesn't exist in the server under the procedures and templates term sheets. So I'm going to fix that. I'm going to have a blank one that's going to go on Lighthouse. But as Michelle pointed out to me, the reason it probably never really made it on there is nobody typically starts from a blank one. Oftentimes people start from the last version of that we did with that investor, because the terms don't change a lot. I mean, the basics. So this you can crib pretty easily from the last document, and there's nothing wrong with doing that. Feel free to do that. But again, as some of these terms might be changing, you need to make sure you're really changing the things that are different in your document and not going, oh yeah, that was pretty much like my waterfall. You need to get into the detail and make sure you're doing that correctly. So lastly, and I meant to say this up front, but it's the same thing I say every training, which is that for some of you who have not been exposed to this before, a lot of this is going to be a little bit of a foreign language, and you're not going to understand it all, and that's okay. A lot of this stuff with equity, you have to hear it multiple times anyhow, but I also want to make sure that if you have a question, stop me and ask. If you don't know what the acronym I'm using, ask me, or don't be afraid to ask a basic question. It's fine. And I'm going to be covering this on a more intermediate level, mainly assuming that you know some of the basics. But I'm happy to, if you have a question, just ask it, and don't feel shy. So we're just going to start going through the term sheet and talking about what these terms mean and what the terms are that we want to get. So the first thing up is depreciation schedule. Now, this is something where we just need to make sure, because I've seen things be wrong, what the depreciation schedule we're using in the projections versus what it is that we're committing to in the, we want them to say what it is, the depreciation schedule that they're assuming we're using in the LOI, because it'll really change the deal. And honestly, I don't think this happens too much anymore. It used to happen. I've seen it happen before, where it's like, what do you mean you're assuming 27.5 years? Our projections say 40. So the reason this is important for a lot of reasons. We'll get a little bit more into it later. But oh, that's the thing I forgot to update. I mean to download. Let me do that real quick, just to download the. No, actually they are in there. Okay. Let's see. So I'll just show you where on the projections you would find that. So this. No, it's not there. I somehow don't have it. Let me just try. I'm sorry. I'm just going to pull it up real quick, okay? Absolutely. Yes. Oh, I see.
Under the ownership structure, this is something that I stumbled upon recently, that prior to bringing the limited investor, the GP is actually 99.9% or 99%, let's say. And Penn, acting as the interim, is only the 1%, right? I just want to sort of highlight that for some folks, that because it is confusing if you're going to the board for just setting up your initial structure. It is the reverse of what it is when you go to close. And it's something that when I was just doing documents recently on Sunflower, it became evident that we show the GP as 99 up front and then switch once the investor comes in. I like that.
Thank you. Okay, so these are community economics projections. They're going to be different in the CHPC projections, but I think you'll be able to find it. I'm not going to go pull up one of those for you right now. But so there's going to be a schedule. There's a schedule here. It's on page 5. On the CHPC ones, it's going to be a different page, but it's going to show what the depreciation schedule is. So here, you can see right here, it says depreciation. Sure. Is that better? Okay. So it shows the depreciation here. And to tell what it is they're using, you just go look here, and it's under 27.5 years. And when you use 27.5 year depreciation, you also use, for site improvements, you use 15 years, and personal property, you use 5 years. So these are all lined up to be, a 27.5 year depreciation schedule. So if you're not sure, this is good to know, before you're going to fill out your term sheet, but it's good to know that it's actually stated in the LOI what assumption they're making about depreciation schedules. Any questions on that? Yeah. Well,
depend on the project?
So it very much depends on the project. Typically you want to go with the 27.5 year because it's you get your losses, you get faster. But there's some projects that we can't use a 27.5 year. We need to go to 40 year because we have too many losses and our capital accounts are going negative. So, and then there's some projects we want to go to 40 year because we get some financial benefits on how we can structure the cash flow. So we're going to talk about that a little bit too. This stuff is very complicated. We talked about it during a training last year, I think. We kind of went over all that in how to read your financial consultant's projections. But it's something, it's complicated, and which depreciation schedule we use is something that I'm very much looking at when I'm reviewing projections with you. And we will talk about that a little bit more when we talk about the cash flow terms we're going to negotiate. Okay, so next up is the pay-in amount and conditions. So this is one where, when you're looking at the LOI from your investor, you want to, as a project manager, you really want to make sure that you are really paying attention to this section, because it's going to have a bunch of conditions that you have to be met before we can get the equity payment. So you want to make sure that those conditions make sense for your project. Sometimes you run into things that just don't, they actually leave them in from the previous version, forget to take them out, that are project specific about commercial space or something, and you don't have commercial space. But also that, if it says that you're going to have to deliver, a C of O, but you're a rehab project, you're not going to have C of Os because you're not taking out of service, things like that. So think that through. And then, let's see, I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint so I remember what I put here. And So, partly you're saying, does this work for the project? When these payments are coming in, does this match my development schedule? Are the conditions ones that make sense, and can we meet them by the expected timing of the payment? Sometimes there's things like, having your property tax exemption that I sometimes question, but we've determined that Mid-Penn can do a process to get a property tax exemption by conversion, which is when these are required. And then one of the big things to look for is that we often have no sooner than dates as a condition. So if you look at this term sheet, under the construction completion installment, to get the $22 million, it says one of the conditions down here is a threshold date, not payable prior to October 1st, 2017. So that's a really important financial point there. It means we're going to have our construction loan outstanding until we get this money in to pay off our construction loan. So is that date the right date? It's usually going to be designed to be roughly about when we would be converting. So when would you typically have a conversion date? How would you do that?
Usually about 6 months after you finish construction and after you've been stabilized for typically 3 months. So, 3 months to lease up, 3 months to stabilize, so 6 months after you finish construction.
Yeah, so that's a typical assumption we use, and that's something you're going to want to make sure is, in your projections, that it makes sense in your projections, that maybe you have a project for some reason you think you're going to want it to be a longer period. So that's typically what we would put in the projection as has gone out to the investor. Sometimes what the investors do to be able to give you a higher price is they'll push that payment out. And sometimes they'll push it out. So the way that their yield formulas that they work with work, usually they're on a quarterly basis. So sometimes if we had it in May, they're going to push it out maybe to July to be able to pay us more. But now we have 2 months more of construction interest to pay. So that's one of the things that your financial consultant should be paying attention to. We'll be thinking about, now maybe that's a better deal. Maybe our construction interest isn't that much and we want to do that. But it's something you need to be aware of and you need to be thinking about and negotiating. So pay attention, special attention to those no sooner than dates. And sometimes we're okay with that. Sometimes it's fine to have something be a little longer. On an HCD project that has HCD money in it, we probably shouldn't be assuming a 3 month, that we're going to convert immediately after meeting the 3 months because they take for freaking ever. So those are some of the things to think about there. The other thing I want to point out here, so if you'll see that the stabilization installment is, what Wells Fargo has done here is they have broken their, oftentimes we get a payment in at closing, and then we get a big payment in at conversion when we're closing the perm loan. And that's kind of a typical structure for us. We can do other structures, but this is the structure we usually put out in our projections and are asking for. What Wells does is they break that conversion payment into 2 payments, one of which is like a completion installment, and the second, which is a stabilization installment. So the completion installment, you can look and see what all those conditions are. And those are all kind of related to lien-free completion. So it's complete and you've paid off your contractor is the base essence of that. Yeah, Abby?
But you notice here that they both have the same threshold date.
Exactly.
What ends up happening is you end up just doing both at the same time.
Exactly.
Even though I don't know if that was the intent, or like Richard Mandel explained to me that the intent was that you could get your really big payment and paid on your construction loan sooner than we normally do, but
right.
It doesn't actually happen here.
So the conditions of the second payment are all sort of more related to lease up.
Yeah.
And so what this means is that the first payment has kind of construction completion risk. The second payment is more about lease up risk. So, construction lenders like this concept because they know they're not taking lease up risk in the same way then to get paid off. But as Abby said, they have the same date. So in essence, what they've done is they've said, okay, it's from a financial point of view, we're still going to pay you the money at the same time, but if lease-up gets delayed, then you can go ahead and get your construction payment by that same date. There's sort of a no later than date and this is exactly what is happening on Fetters, and it's going to really help us a lot because construction was delayed so much that we're going to be able to meet the conditions of the construction completion later than we expected, but much closer to that no sooner than date. And so on April 1st, hopefully, we're going to be able to get the completion payment, which was normally when we thought we were going to convert as well. Now we aren't going to be able to convert until July, but we're still going to be able to pay down, get this huge slug of money to pay down the construction loan. So this is something that Wells kind of routinely does, and it's something that we could, ask other investors to do as well. Because I think it's confusing to people, and it's partly confusing because it often shows up in your financial consultant still as one payment. They have them combined, but legally they're not, And then you also see here on the final two payments that there's an 8609 payment. Let's just talk a little bit about what the conditions are for some of these. So, for a conversion payment, it's going to be meeting the conditions to close your perm loan. And so you want to make sure that any conditions they put in there are more related to that the perm loan can get funded than echoing the terms of what would require the perm loan to get funded. So, your perm loan is going to require, meeting a debt coverage ratio for a certain amount of time. It's great if they don't have that in here because we have to meet it for the perm, and they can instead say funding of the perm loan. So just think about it a little bit that way, that we want to not totally duplicate and have to prove to both of them at the same time. And then for the 8609 installments, so the 8609s are the form you get from TCAC that actually allocates your credits to you. So once you've closed your perm loan, you can submit an application to TCAC called the place in service application or the 8609 application, and that's just the final part of the TCAC process to actually get the official credits allocated to you. And then so under that, we don't really know how long it's going to take TCAC to review. And they've been in the last couple of years, they've been very slow. It's been like 9 months. That they say they're speeding up now. This is an area where what your no sooner than date is, we might want to not be too aggressive here because we might just be waiting on TCAC anyhow. So here, the no sooner than date is February 1st, so it's 4 months after we are expecting to convert. We probably, if we wanted to, we could have pushed that out a little bit. It might not have made too much difference to the economics of the deal, but maybe it would have helped us. But so we are going to get this $400,000 payment once we get our 8609 and do the rest of these things. And then there's a final installment of tax returns. So sometimes investors want to break that out as another item, that the first year tax returns, because what sometimes happens, depending on where you are in the calendar, you might get your 8609s but not have a tax return yet. So you can think about how that's going to work here. But again, you see they've broken it out, but it has the same no sooner than date. So we might get these at the same time, might meet it all, but if we don't have the tax returns, we have everything else, we can still get the rest of the money. So those are kind of the things to think about. Any more questions on that part?
If it takes TCAC 9 months and their 8609 payment is delayed by 4 or 5 months, then, and this might go to your next section on adjusters, then there could potentially be a small adjuster because they're making that payment
under
later.
Not under most of our deals. I don't think we have very few adjusters that would that would make a difference on.
Because that's not a timing thing. I mean, they're
It is,
getting,
but most of our timing adjusters don't take into account when the equity comes in.
so it's all about credit delivery.
Yeah. That's, but it could if we had an IRR adjuster. Except oftentimes they say things like not counting any, the payment comes in more than 1 quarter later, or if this payment, it's only if this payment comes in later. Sometimes they qualify. Yeah. Hello?
Is it generally the case that the way we're covering those payments are coming, maybe a year later, is by deferring developer fee, or is there other places where we utilize that money once it comes in?
We almost always have to have that payment be paying for developer fee. It's not really deferred developer fee. It's just developer fee that's paid at the end. Because there's nothing really else to pay at that point. Everything else has been paid. And so thank you for raising that, Polo, because that's another thing you're thinking about in this negotiation. Sometimes investors will, as a way to, again, to get their IRR up, they'll propose a much bigger final payment than we have put out. And the problem there is that you can't have the final payment be more really paying anything other than developer fee and, maybe accountant costs or something. And so what is it, how are we going to pay for, how are we going to convert if we don't have that money at conversion? And essentially it could mean, that if it was 1.4 million, that means you just basically have to defer getting all of your developer fee until the final payment, because that's the only thing that can go out that long. So be careful of that when you see that, if you see a proposal like that. Does that make sense?
What do we generally want to get paid in developer fee at close?
Well, yeah, $400,000. That's, and that's, something that could be, at Mid-Penn, we haven't been terrifically, cash driven. So getting more money than that up front hasn't been seen as a priority. And basically, the more money we get up front, the bigger construction loan we're going to need and have to pay interest on. So we could even get less than that if we need to. I think it's a good thing to start with. Sometimes then if, in the end, if you have costs go up right at the end and you can't increase your construction loan right before closing, then, that's what you can balance with on your construction period sources to get less developer fee up front. That makes sense? Yeah. Yeah, Chris.
And what does IRR stand for? We've been using that.
Yeah. So IRR is internal rate of return, and that's a financial calculation or a financial metric that investors and we use to help figure out how to price the credit, how to price the limited partnership interest. And so they're going to get their tax benefits, a combination of, from a combination of the tax credits and the tax benefits that the project is going to create by being able to write off depreciation and interest. And so looking at the IRR, it's a combination of what those benefits are and when the money that the capital equity that they're putting in, when that comes in. So the main ways you can change sort of an investor getting a higher yield is to backload when they put the money in. So if they put the money in later, then, and they're still getting the benefits at the same time, they're getting a higher yield on their money. So IRR, another word for that is just yield.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Good.
And isn't there generally a range that we know they want to stay within?
Absolutely.
Right.
So once we sort of agree on a deal, some of them actually have explicit language in their LOI, Union does, and others do too, that says, at the time of closing, you still have to maintain this IRR. So if we make changes and their IRR goes down, then they might change their pricing and lower it. So that's partly, because things always change between when we sign the LOI and closing, right? But hopefully, if you have a really major change, it could affect.
Or I think we had within a certain, and maybe we negotiated that, but within a certain number of basis points.
Yeah.
It could shift, but within 50 basis points.
Yeah, and so that's really important. If you have that in your LOI that says you need to maintain this IRR, the IRR that they're putting in there matches the deal that they're giving you right then. Because sometimes as you've renegotiated things, you haven't updated your projections yet, And it could be that, you know, you need to make sure that that IRR matches the deal that you're signing the LOI for.
And our financial consultant
Should be looking at that, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, but the bottom line is, unfortunately, you need to be on top of them, right? You've got to be reminding them it's our project. We are the ones that have the financial interest in it. And you know, you can trust them, but you need to make sure, you need to question, too, to make sure that they're redoing things, that what they're doing makes sense and all that. And that's what I'm doing as well. So the next section is credit adjusters. And we kind of went over a lot of this stuff already. We had a specific training just on adjusters. So I don't think I want to spend a whole lot of time on them. They're quite confusing sometimes. I have a hard time when I'm reading them. I try to parse through the language, and that's what you should do too. The things, though, that you need to really just, so I'm going to give you this much of a reminder, is to break out what, there's a lot of language in there about adjusters. So on this one, where this has been filled in under, it says under sections 3.03 and 3.05, it talks about, so first of all, there's a lot of information right there about what our preferred terms are. So let's go over that first. So we can have adjusters for timing, we can have adjusters for overall credit delivery, and we can have adjusters for solar credits. And then we have what's usually called an ongoing adjuster, which really comes up more in the guarantees. And so for all of those, we want to have upward adjusters for both timing and overall credit delivery. The investor wants us to have a downward adjuster, so they can say if you don't deliver as much credits as you said you're going to do, or if you deliver them later than you said you were, we're going to adjust your equity downward. And we want to make sure that it goes both ways. That in addition to, if we deliver more credits than we said, or we deliver them faster than we said, we get an upward adjuster in the equity. So you want to make sure that there are both upward and downward adjusters for both of those things. And if same thing if there's solar credits in your deal, oftentimes the solar credits are going to be a separate adjuster provision in there. And our preferred language for timing adjusters is either IRR, which Bank of America has for timing, or Union and Wells have what's is more of a net present value formula. And what that says is that we're going to take, for any credits you don't deliver in the first year, we're going to dock you on the equity for that amount, but we're going to give you an adjustment for what they're worth in year 11. Because if you don't take them in year 1, they're going to end up getting taken in year 11. So that's going to be, you know, the net present value language is we don't like as much as the IRR language that B of A has, but we haven't been able to negotiate that with either Wells or Union. So that's an example where it's fine to have this. That's kind of the deal we're going to get. But what the discount rate they're using is for that present value adjustment shouldn't be any greater than what the IRR is on the entire project. So that's something you would be looking for. Often it specifies an IRR. And then another thing that comes up is it often talks about first-year credits. Well, sometimes we have more than one first year, or we have a first year that changes from one year to the next. If you you were going to lease up in November, now you're going to start in January. You're now in a different first year. Sometimes they specify it by calendar years. So this is something where you want to think about, when am I leasing up, and is it possible that my first year is going to switch from one year to the next, one calendar year to the next, and or am I going to be leasing up over 2 calendar years? And that's not particularly uncommon either. So if that's the case, we need to pay special attention to the language, how they're defining what first year means. Because because you can end up with these things that don't make sense in the end. And then the state credit timing adjusters, I don't know if you guys remember, but we did a whole exercise where we were pointing out how state credit adjusters are very different than federal credit. The timing adjusters on state credit come in because you deliver less credit. So that's, if you have state credits in your deal, you want to pay special attention to that. So yeah, on Chinatown, where we have a bunch of state credits, we're going to have to, that'll be a big focus, how those state credits are going to work. And oftentimes, so investors will have a cap on their upward adjusters. So if they'll say, okay, we'll give you more credits if this happens, but no more than $500,000 or $100,000, $1 million, whatever. This one is $1 million. That's pretty high. So we want to test. It's not worth, the way I look at it, it's not worth negotiating for things we don't need. So if $1 million, we can't figure out how we would ever get up to $1 million, then great, we don't need to negotiate that. But if there's reasons to think that we would have upward adjusters, we can kind of try to figure out what that range might be and make sure we have a cap that is adequate for that. And I think where I've really seen that sometimes is sometimes we'll start a project where we had to shave down the cost, but we know we want to try to add a source and increase the cost. That has happened sometimes. So we're starting with costs that we kind of think are maybe lower than they're really going to end up. There we want to make sure we have good upward adjusters if we can get more credit from that basis. So when can we get more credit from that basis? 4%. Yeah, if it's a 4% deal. On a 9%, we can't get any more credits than we got allocated, right? So if you have a 4% deal, upward adjusters typically are more important, because on a 9% deal, it's mainly just going to be for delivering more credit. And there's going to be a cap to how much you're really going to be able to get out of that. Okay? So I think that's all we're going to cover on that right now. Again, there's more on first-year credits and timing and adjusters in the adjuster training and in the PowerPoint, which you can access. Okay. Guarantor.
Would you say that again? Would you say that again? There's another training you said?
Yeah, we did a training, I don't know, earlier this year or last year or something that was specifically on tax credit adjusters and first year credit. So there's a whole PowerPoint on that in the training folder, which Susan and I can work to get onto Lighthouse. Yeah. Okay. So on guarantors, there's often a separate guarantee agreement. You might want to look at that. I think the main issue on who the guarantor is that it's almost always going to have to be MidPenn. Even if you're doing a farm deal and MidPenn isn't actually a part of it, they're still going to be the guarantor because they're the entity that has the assets that investors are looking for. So just know that. And it means you're going to have MidPenn. I don't know, how do we do that at development committee? Do we, on farm deals, we still have something go to the board for the MidPenn guarantees, or the development committee? Yeah, we have separate resolutions for that. So just keep that in mind.
You want to say what a guarantee is?
Yeah, so that's who the guarantor is, and then there's the guarantees themselves. So the typical guarantees that we're going to have to provide and we want to negotiate are a repurchase guarantee. So the first thing that says is if we, this is kind of about construction risk. If we don't complete construction, they will have already paid us some equity, and they're not getting any credits or benefits out of it. And we have a requirement to buy them back, to buy back their limited partnership interest if we don't complete construction and start delivering credits. So this is very standard. The issue here is you just want to make sure that the requirements on it make sense for your project. So oftentimes there'll be things like, if we haven't completed by X date, well, that X date should be pretty far out, pretty far past when we actually expect to complete. These are sort of real outside dates that we would have to do something by. So you want to just look at that language and make sure it doesn't seem ridiculous, or that that we wouldn't not be able to meet it outside of a catastrophe. And then we have, the other thing on the repurchase guarantee is it should be reduced by the amount of any credits already taken. So if there have been credits delivered, which on a rehab that could definitely happen, that counts against having to repay them back because they haven't gotten some of the benefits they expected. Does that make sense? And I think that's pretty typical language we usually have already negotiated in, but it's something to remember. And then, and that's the kind of thing when you're filling out this term sheet, that might not be in the LOI. That might be language that's more specific that's in the LPA. So at the LOI stage, you might say, you know, repurchase guarantee required, no details. Details will be in LPA or something like that. And when you're doing the LPA review, that's when you'll fill in the detail. That's one I wouldn't expect to be necessarily in the LOI. Another one is the operating deficit guarantee. And so for that, the operating deficit guarantee is saying that if the project, we have a requirement to cover any operating deficits until the project achieves lease up. Until then, that's sort of, we're on the hook for it until it reaches lease up. Once it reaches lease up, then we're going to have this operating deficit guarantee that is going to survive for some period of time and is going to be capped at some amount. And the important things here are that we want to reduce what the cap is, and we want to reduce what the time period is and what the conditions are to remove it. So what our terms are, we'd like it to be capped at about 6 to 9 months, and that means 6 to 9 months of operating expenses and debt service, and not extend beyond 36 months following achievement of the required DCR. So that is what we're routinely getting now, but again, maybe we aren't going to get that. That's one of the things that may well change in this market. We might have longer operating deficit guarantee caps. So we'll see what happens there. We may need to redefine what our preferred term is there. And then the other thing that's really important is that we want to be able to use our operating reserves during that time period without having to cover it with our operating guarantee. So we want to make sure the language is in there that says, first you can use the operating reserves, then you have to kick in your own money. Make sense? So that's an important thing to look for. And so you see under section 6.1, the development is the development completion guarantee. So that's the other important one. Is we're agreeing we're going to complete and lease it up. And it's, you know, until we meet those conditions, everything is under this development completion guarantee, including operating losses during lease up. Okay? Questions?
Do we sometimes guarantee like a Section 8 contract too? And I think some investors want that.
Good question. So we could have other kinds of guarantees that come in specific to your project and its financial structure. So the big one is the Section 8 incremental income. So we're seeing that now from B of A. We haven't been seeing it from our other investors. But what they want there is some kind of a guarantee that if Section 8 goes away, we're going to sort of fund those deficits. So it's really kind of already covered under the operating deficit guarantee. So I think what we'll see more of is not so much, you know, maybe some specific language within the guarantee, but it could also be that a requirement is to fund a reserve. So what we're doing on Van Buren is they were requiring us to fund a reserve. Instead, we're changing it into a specific Section 8 guarantee. So we can take that money that otherwise was going to sit in a reserve account and use it to pay for construction cost overruns. I mean, not overruns, but
are they requiring? Are you seeing language requiring guarantees for the 15-year term, or is it for a certain period of time until you can transition residents?
The one on Van Buren is actually burns off. So it doesn't. It's not just for 15 years. It burns off under a calculation that they've done of when the Section 8 would go away. So If we've gotten to year 10 and we still have the Section 8 in place, then we don't need to have as much of a guarantee. So that's the idea, is it burns off as it doesn't happen. You know, if it happened, it doesn't go away.
There's a new election, new presidential election.
Yeah.
The next 4 years will.
Yeah. So we might see more of that, because what we're hearing is that might be a thing that investors are getting more uncomfortable with, is Section 8 risk. So they might, yeah. Oh, thank you. Okay. Now I got to go find it. Okay. Is there a limit on how much guarantee Mid-Penn can provide? For example, overall exposure to all the guarantees combined for operating deficit guarantee. It's a good question. I think, you know, the limit is that whatever we need to do to secure a good investment, right? I mean, we're going to be somewhat driven here by what the market is. But I've never seen us, you know, try to quantify and add them all together. That might be a good idea. So I don't think this has come up.
Yeah, or I think they do have a sense of what are, and I kind of remember back in like 2009, or you know, when it was a similar market to now, that there were more investors kind of, and as there were developers who were not necessarily as strong as Mid-Penn. I think if there's a smaller developer, your investor might be asking more of those questions than we're getting asked at Mid-Penn. But I don't think that we have anyone ever saying, you know, worried, oh, if you add them all up, there's no way you could actually guarantee those.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, the reason I think it hasn't come up so much at Mid-Penn is because we have the financial resources to kind of, that investors aren't so concerned whether we are going to be able to provide these guarantees. But it's a good point that there could come a point where they question that. I don't think we've seen it so much at Mid-Penn. Yeah. Let's see. So it's a little after 10. Why don't we? I think we'll start in a little bit on the next section, and then we'll about 10:20 we'll play our game and then take a break. 10:15 and take a break. Okay. So let's see. I guess 10:20. What are you laughing at?
We were going somewhere we didn't go.
What are you laughing at?
Stood up, ready to play the game.
Oh. Okay. Let's see. Okay, the clicker's not working now. Oh yeah, probably, you're right. Okay, thank you. Okay, so on fees and earnings, this has to do with our asset management fee, our partnership management fee, incentive management fee, property management fees, resident services fees, and then really also we can't really talk about that without talking about waterfalls and distributions. So the term waterfall, in case that's confusing to some of you, what that means is when we get cash that flows out of the project, where does it go? Who gets it? How does it get distributed? So as a reminder, the way sort of this, the way a partnership works is, so the limited partner is a 99.99% partner, and we're a 0.01% partner. And in order to be able to sort of prove to the IRS that we're a legitimate partnership, we typically can't have unequal distributions of who gets the cash and the benefits from the partnership. So, you know, theoretically, that LP should get 99.99% of everything, and we get 0.01% of everything. But that's not really what we want, right? What we want is the limited partner to get 99.99% of all of the tax benefits, and we really want all of any cash that comes out of it. And limited partners aren't really motivated by the cash. That's not why they're in it. They're in it for the tax benefits. But we just aren't allowed under tax law and sort of partnership law to set it up that way. Because then it's just a tax shelter, and then they'll say, oh, it's not a legitimate economic transaction, and therefore the limited partner, can't get 99.99% of the tax benefits. And if that were to happen, everything falls apart, right? Because that's what they've paid for, is all of these tax benefits. So we play this tightrope game of what can we do that we can get as much of the cash flow as we can without jeopardizing them getting 99.99% of the tax benefits. And so what this is sort of what the tax attorneys, or you might hear them referred to as like, we don't want to mess up the allocations. And so there's a lot of ways that we try to do this. And the main way is that if cash gets paid to us in the form of a fee, then that's okay. It's not, what we care about is money that would be considered a distribution. So if it's a fee and we're doing something to earn it, then it's okay. So that's what the fees is kind of about, is getting as much of that set up as fees as we can. And then the cash waterfall is sort of about you know, how does that all work and what's left after we've paid the fees, and how can we try to get that money to MidPenn instead of to the LP. And so there's a lot of different ways we do that. And again, this is something that I'm paying a lot of attention to before we're sending it out to the investor. And this is where we want to set that up at the beginning and in the projections we're sending, and be thinking this through what our strategy is. And I don't think we'll go into every nuance of what those strategies can be, but some of the things to specifically then we want in the LOI to have this all really specified and set out so we know what it is. Yeah, Andrew.
So accounting, I mean, when you talk about, you know, how it's supposed to be 99.9 and 0.01 distributed, but we have all the tax benefits going to the investor, and then we're trying to collect the fee. Does the actual balance of, you know, those percentages matter? Like whether it's, how does that actually factor in the end, those percentages into the the amount of benefits, the fees we're getting versus the tax benefits for them?
We'll talk about it. It's kind of in the waterfall. In the end, the last thing in the waterfall is 99.99% of the cash goes to the LP. Except if you're using 40-year depreciation. And that's where the depreciation schedule comes back in. And don't ask me why. This all seems pretty wacky to me. But you know, if you're using accelerated depreciation, some of this is just understanding the terms too. There's about 5 things you can call everything, right? Accelerated depreciation is the same thing as 27.5-year depreciation. It's the same thing as MACRS, M-A-C-R-S. That's what the accountants say. They say MACRS. Oh, you're using MACRS? That means accelerated 27.5-year depreciation. If you're using that, then you don't have some of the same leeway on allocations as if you're using 40-year depreciation. So that's the reason why on some projects we actually choose to use 40-year depreciation, because it gives us more freedom on the cash flow to have unequal allocations.
So Alice, that would be especially true in a project where we think there's a lot of cash flow.
Absolutely.
Some projects that have very little cash flow, maybe we don't care as much. But on
because we're giving up potentially some equity up front, because we're going to be delivering less tax benefits to the investor because our depreciation is a lot slower, and therefore they're not going to be willing to pay us as much. That's the disadvantage of 40-year depreciation versus getting more equity up front. But if we think there's a lot of cash flow, that's probably a choice we want to make if we don't have another way to capture that cash flow.
Alice?
Yeah.
This is Ashley. So you're reminding me of on St. Stephen's, like one of the early conversations we were having was whether or not we needed our services budget to and reserve to be as large as it was, because we were hoping that in the future we'd be able to have multiple projects down in the Central Coast area that could kind of be served by the same services staff, therefore decreasing the amount we needed to be holding on St. Stephen's. And then that was like kind of the conversation we were having, right, about whether or not you go with the accelerated depreciation versus the 40-year depreciation, because we weren't sure if we were going to be able to capture that cash if we were able to create this kind of
what's the right word, way of distributing our services needs that would actually free up some cash, right? Wasn't that the conversation we had? I just want to make sure I'm like placing this in the correct place.
You absolutely are. And that's so the issue there is sometimes when we're looking at, do we think there's going to be a lot of cash that we want to try to capture, then we sometimes, if the answer is no, but we think maybe there might be in the future, that our projections don't show it, but that we think that what actually happens in operations might be different than what we're projecting. And that's when it gets tricky. So one thing that we always know is probably going to be different is our vacancy assumption. We have to run it with a 5% vacancy, but our, company-wide, it's less than 1%. So right off the bat, we know that our projections aren't really going to reflect reality in that respect, and that we're going to have more cash flow as a result. Another, like the one Ash is bringing up, is we had a really high expense budget for services, which we were projecting and we could afford, but we're hoping to bring it down through, in the future when there's more projects that they could share with. And so if that happens, we're going to have more cash flow. So then the question becomes, okay, how much do we think that's really going to happen, and are we willing to negotiate and get 40-year depreciation and give up some equity to do that? So that becomes sometimes a very strategic decision. So that might be one of the issues that comes up on your project. Well, let's just go through the fees. Go ahead.
I didn't think, because our deals always have soft loans in them to be paid through residual receipt, cash flow, that there is ever any cash flow. Like the intent is that the cash flow left gets split 50% to pay off your public funding, and then the other 50 as an incentive management fee. Or in the case of Sequoia Belhaven, because we did a seller carryback, take-back note, the other 50 is to help pay back that note as a cash check.
That's right, and the issue is that 50% of cash flow that isn't going to the soft lender. So remember that, who does that go to? It goes to the borrower. Who's the borrower? It's the partnership, right? It's the partnership. It's not MidPenn. It's not the MidPenn general partner. It's the partnership. Who owns 99.99% of that partnership? The investor. So the issue is, how do we keep that 50% of the cash flow coming to a MidPenn entity and not to the partnership? And the other part of it is how much, before we get to the residual receipts payments, the residual receipts lender is going to allow us to take some fees, basically partnership management fees. We want to make sure we get that as well, that's above, before we even get to the 50%. And it could be that it's deferred fee that we're taking, or it could be that we've negotiated something about services, and it's going to go first to services or something like that. So that's what this waterfall is figuring out how does that calculation work, who gets the money, and how do we keep it from the investor. And again, this is not like the investors are fine with not getting it. So it's not like we're trying to steal it from them or something. It's just more of a tax structuring issue of how are we legally allowed to do that.
And so in the case of Sequoia Belhaven, because the seller provided a loan, it is okay to set it up where MidPenn, in this case, the seller, is getting that entire 50% back to pay off the note.
Exactly, because again, we can pay things to MidPenn entities if they're in the form of fees, or if they're in the form of loan repayments. Got it. And so, or deferred developer fee, that's something we earned, right? So there are things that we can pay. What is problematic is what we often call either a distribution or an incentive management fee. And the incentive management fee is what tax attorneys are very uncomfortable with if you're using 27.5-year depreciation. So that's why we sometimes switch to 40-year depreciation to be able to get that incentive management fee. And there's a lot of, this is always a hard part of the negotiation, partly because we're usually negotiating with the business folks at the bank, and but then it's their tax attorneys later that might come back and say, no, you can't do that. So the important thing is if you're negotiating with them and they're saying you can do something that you're not sure that their tax attorneys are going to be okay with, that you include their tax attorney at the time of negotiation. Or sometimes maybe you don't want to, because sometimes maybe you think you're better off, you're going to be able to, you know, more convince, you convince the attorneys of it better if the business folks have already agreed to it. Sometimes, you know, it's a little bit of a call there. So, so I think just real quick, let's just go, we've sort of covered a lot of stuff here, but I want to cover some of it in a little bit more detail. And so let's get through a couple of these and then we'll take a break. So one of the things we're negotiating is the LP's fee, because they're going to get to take a fee themselves. And it is priority over everything. So if there's not much cash flow, they're going to get paid before we get paid. And so we want to try to, our incentive is to get this as low as we can. My experience is that, you know, they're pretty much going to want $7,500, maybe $8,500. This one is $8,500. There's a lot of cash flow on this deal. We figured we could afford it. Some deals that have very little cash flow, we're going to want to take a harder negotiating position on. Because if there's really not enough money to pay both asset management and partnership management fees, then whatever they get as asset management fee, we're not getting as partnership management fee. So that's the thing to think about is how much can we afford? And the other really important thing to think about here is, do my soft lenders have caps on these? Because if the soft lender is limiting us to something, then there's no point really in negotiating something higher than that. So, and sometimes soft lenders have combined caps where they say the two combined together can't be more than $25,000. And this is where escalators become really important. Is we really, so when you're, so it's just important in negotiating your soft loan documents. You want to get, in your soft loan documents, you want to get those caps as high as you can, and you want to make sure they have escalators on them that they can increase. And because otherwise what happens sometimes is we end up with an investor who insists on escalating their fee. And if it's capped by the soft lender, it just means that every year they get more and we get less if the cap doesn't go up, the overall cap. Does that make sense? So those are things to remember when you're doing this to, you know, if you already have soft loan documents to, you know what they say, and if you don't, to make sure when you negotiate your soft loan documents, that's where, I mean, that's where we really want to negotiate it to, is in the soft loan documents. We're going to skip GP incentive management fee for a minute and then go to property management with bookkeeping fee. This comes up sometimes in, it's in the Wells LOI, I think. It'll definitely be in your LPAs. They want to kind of put amount in there for property management fee. It typically has not been an issue what it is. It's just getting it right. And I think you guys probably know a lot more about this than I do of some of the travails we've gone through of trying to get this sort of sorted through and adding a, a bookkeeping fee to it. There's some nuance to that that I think you guys know a lot more about than I do. Anything you want to add there?
Actually, I want to step back really quick, because this is one thing that early on, the first few years that I was here, confused me a lot in terms of the LP asset management fee and the partnership management fee. So even it's called the LP management fee or asset management fee, that's actually what's going to the partnership. And what's the partnership management fee is actually what's coming to MidPen, or what I always thought as our asset management work, our fee. And so the names are sort of a little bit reversed, so I would always get confused, but I just want to clarify that for a few folks.
You said limited, it goes to limited partnership, but there's a limited partner.
Partner, I'm sorry, but it's called, you see it often referred to as the asset management fee, and I always thought that's the one that comes to MidPen, but it's kind of the reverse. So
right, it is confusing, and you see different names for these too. Sometimes they'll call them different things. So you have to just kind of translate what the names are, but exactly, it gets paid to the limited partner for them. One of the things that comes up too, I would say, on partnership management fees is what gets tricky about partnership management fees is they fall after deferred fee in the waterfall. And what sometimes will happen on some deals, and particularly on some 4% Act rehabs, so number one is if you have a lot of deferred developer fee, we might not show any partnership management fee actually being paid, because deferred fee is going to soak up all the cash flow. If that's the case, we still want to have a partnership management fee. There ends up being issues on whether it can get expensed, and you don't need to worry about those. But on some ACK rehabs where we have capital account issues, and I'm not going to kind of go into all that, but where our capital accounts are going negative too soon, we want less losses. We're trying to figure out how to get less losses. So one of the ways to do that is to not have a partnership management fee, and instead be getting paid in a different way, and it's usually through a sponsor loan or a take-back loan. So we're going to get the same money, but we're not going to call it a partnership management fee. And in that case, we just need to keep a minimum $500 partnership management fee in there in order to, we need that for purposes of our welfare tax exemption. It's one of the sort of tests in looking at that. So sometimes not having a partnership management fee, or a very minimal one, is fine. So, and that's a strategic choice. But it can get confusing, and so that's where you can put it, in the explanation. You can say, partnership management fee of $500, in order to reduce losses. Cash flows instead going to, whatever. Then there's the resident services or a social services fee, and this is one where typically we don't want it to be called a fee. Okay, we want it just to be, because what happens is, if it gets called a fee, they're going to look at it as part of all of the fees coming to us. And part of this issue of whether it's reasonable that we're getting these fees is if we're getting about a zillion fees, then that's not really reasonable. It's like we have to be getting fees for things we're doing that make sense and that are reasonable. So they would might count a services fee within sort of our overall, what they're looking at is fees being paid, and say that's too much. So one thing is that we don't really want to call it a fee. We just want to say we're getting paid for providing resident services. And the so I should actually kind of change that description there, I think, to say that. And if it is a fee, we need to know that that's going to be work within their system, or that they're not counting as a fee toward any fee caps. Okay. So then I think we'll go back to GP incentive management fee and the cash waterfall after the break to just kind of go through that again. And then now what we're going to do, we'll play a little game. Have you guys ever played Balderdash? Okay, so under Balderdash, one of the things you do is you make up definitions of words that you don't know. But one of the things in Balderdash, you get to make up definitions of acronyms you don't know. Okay? And I know you guys have all played like Cards Against Humanity or Apples to Apples, where the instead of there being a right answer, the answer is whatever the judge chooses is the right answer. So we're going to play Balderdash Against Humanity with the tax credit acronyms. I've got some real prizes, Starbucks, some gift cards. Okay, so what we're going to do this is, I'm going to give you an acronym, and you're all going to write down an answer, and you're going to give them to me. And those of you on the phone are going to send them in via text, but don't send it in until I tell you to. And then I'm going to read through them, and I'm going to choose a winner. Okay? So the acronym we're going to use is ROFR, R-O-F-R. And I don't want you to say what it really is.
So Alice, we're supposed to make us the funniest one we think you'll like?
Exactly. I'm the judge, so the one you think I'm going to like the best.
It doesn't have to be related at all to.
Only do one. No, it probably shouldn't be, unless it's a funny one related to before. No, it could be. It could be. I mean, think who your audience is and who your judge is. This is wide open. Anything you want. I know it has an F in it, but you might want to, tone down the language a little bit. No, I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe I think. We're going to be talking about ROFRs a lot in the next section, so I think it might make it more interesting if we, know what they are. R-O-F-R. You got like 2 minutes here. Okay, this is kind of like stream of consciousness. Don't think about it too much. Don't be kind. Yeah. Well, I might have to play favorites with the people on there, but whatever. It's okay. And those of you on the phone, once you start reading them, I'll tell you to just send them in on the text function. Yes, it has to do with cats, right, Matt? Okay, true story. I had a dream last night. I thought about this idea right when I was going to sleep. It involved being in a dorm room that had like 10 people in it. They were pretty much all of you guys from work. At one point, I was trying to sleep and everybody was in another part of the room playing a board game. And Matt's cat was waking me up. So I don't think I should be thinking about this stuff before I go to bed at night. No, but I've heard. I've seen pickles on the pickle cam.
She wouldn't wake you up though.
Okay. It actually was your cat, but it wasn't named Pickles, so it probably wasn't Pickles. But okay, time's up, guys. Don't think about it anymore. Okay, who hasn't done it yet? Michelle, come on. It's okay. It's okay. We're laughing them all. So. Okay. You got one, Susan? Okay. Folks online, why don't you go ahead and text them in now? Okay. Okay, so I'll start with what I have so far online. Okay. Right only for righteous people. Well, I'm righteous and I'm right, so I like that. Really ostentatious fairy writers. Or do they have those up in Oregon, Ashley? Or random occupiers of fraternity rooms. Okay, I like to tie in to the dream. That's great. Okay, so keep sending them in. I'm going to start reading them now. Royalties on first raccoon. Okay, that's pretty random. Right on for real. Oh, that's pretty groovy. Yeah. Okay, Susan, I don't quite get this. We are family. Righteously obtaining fabulous rewards. Nice. Roses or floral resonance. Right of fabulous rice. This is pretty random, guys. Roll over flying reams. Okay, I kind of like that one. I don't know what it means, but it sounds funny. Real office fun rookie. Oh, I like that. I like the idea of a fun rookie. Yeah. Reality offsetting fairyland rampages. I'm learning something about you people. Run out for run. Roving otters finding redevelopment. Oh, somebody knows my spirit animal. Somebody knew me on that one. Rolling on the floor ranting. That works pretty well. Hey, it is. Oh, can you do that for me, Susan? Relaxing on floor, refusing. Okay, let's see what else we have online here. Roaming on the fortress of reality. Oh, I kind of like that one. That has a lot of tie-in to the work we do, I think. Well, I think I'm going to go with roving otters finding redevelopment.
Did you read your text ones, Alice?
I did. Did you hear me?
Oh, I didn't hear all of them.
Oh, you texted me. Okay, I thought it was I understood it through the chat function. I will look at the text messages.
Oh, I thought you said to text you.
Oh, it's fine. That's fine. I just didn't. I wasn't clear. Sorry. Okay. So I don't have an. Sorry, Andrew. You're not in there yet. I got to read these first. Randomly organized fund redistribution. That's pretty good. That's pretty tax credit related. Ridiculously onerous financial rigmarole. That's pretty good, Sarah. Oh, Andrew M., I like this. Oh, really? Oh, for real? Okay, Andrew, the other Andrew gets it, sorry. I like that, Andrew. Nice job. Really?
It's like the Oscars.
It is. Those are Oscars. Okay, Andrew, I'll bring you your Starbucks gift card tomorrow. Sorry. It was Price Waterhouse's fault. Okay, so let's take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and talk about this some more. I'm never going to think we're over the same. Follow the intent. The intent was to make sure your eyes didn't glaze over too much. Let's see. Did you know that the otters like this T-shirt? I did not. Oh, well, that's why I like it. We had this discussion.
I really like otters actually. I saw them at the Monterey Aquarium. They're awesome. They're like sea dogs. They're really cool.
I know me.
I can see maybe that we're going to call it more.
I thought it was right inside an owner person who could say like, yeah, let's figure this out. I think.
Good. You read that.
Yeah, I need to close it out. Okay. And then you send me at the end of this month. Yeah. Why it's something. I think the real thing for us to ask is should we just move stuff out from storage instead of extending it? But we have to get his like approval. I guess. The other thing is this is an effect. Yeah, he didn't answer that question, which I was more curious about than anything else. Talk about university. Yeah, but yours for me. Or I don't know, like side note. Like have big hands to go.
So
I have a feeling that if we made it available, like
so basically,
yeah, maybe.
I actually had that like what? Somebody flagged that.
Yeah.
This is a good opportunity to bring an honor.
Like Dave at the very, like I got a hold of him and he was at the very end of that meeting. Jack. White male. Yeah. When I first met him, he was so young and spry, like one of their
I'm trying to discuss when you look away. I think that the otters are like sort of right, and they're the river otters are cute.
And we're going to the Department of Conservation.
Okay, I don't remember. Yeah, I will forgive you on it.
He was on the wall. He had like he put up all these like. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Oh yeah, sea otters.
Yeah. He also like claims that he lost.
Oh yeah, they jump on the guy. Sea otters are much cuter.
Yeah. We have a guy, a resident who's like in the nursing home indefinitely right now. Yeah, we left it like.
Yep.
Okay, good. Yep. My other mic just died, but this one, now I have to hold it, darn it. Okay, so we're going to get started again.
Yeah, I was worried that I would.
So going back to the waterfall, let's kind of look at the at what the term sheet says about waterfalls. So part of the point of the waterfall, we've talked about this quite a bit already now, but is how will the cash get distributed? And so part of what in order to really look at this, we kind of want to know something in here about not just what the waterfall says, but what do we think how much cash do we have, and what do we think is going to happen? So one thing is, for example, say, is there a deferred fee? Do we expect there to be a deferred fee? Because if there's not deferred fee, if there is deferred fee, it's going to really change what happens. And it's also going to change what happens, depending on how much cash flow you have. Because what happens on some waterfalls is, all of the cash goes to the first 2 items, and there's nothing left for the next 10. So in some ways, it may not matter what the next 10 say, if we can really see that it's always going to go to the first 2 items. And there's some deals that are like that. You still are going to have the rest of it, but it's not going to end up being put into play. So what's good in these, when you fill this out, is to give some flavor of that. So this, stating whether there's a deferred fee or not matters. Now, also you need to keep in mind in waterfalls is we may be projecting that there's no deferred fee, but if you have a big bust during construction and there is, then what happens? So just keep that in mind. So you can see how Nasreen filled this one, and then she basically just copied it all in. And I think that's fine. That's fine. I would, no problem with that. But copying it in isn't a substitution for you thinking about it. So, and I'm not saying that's what happened, but the point here, again, it's not just to fill this thing out. It's a trigger for you to think about it and think, does this work? This is what we want. And so that's sometimes what I worry a little bit about when I do see the whole thing just copied in. Okay, well, did you analyze it? And so, but I think it's not a bad thing to do here on something that's so detail-oriented and is pretty darn hard to summarize, right? So this is fine. And so I think, when we look through this, let's just look through this one real quickly and kind of talk about what it means, okay? So the cash flow is going to be distributed as follows. The first one is to the investor limited partner if there's any unpaid credit adjuster amounts, unpaid recapture amount, and unpaid change in law adjuster. So what that means is if there's, within the document it says if they don't get certain things that they're expecting, then we have to pay them back for it, but only out of cash flow. So, but it means that they have the priority on the cash flow for that. So this one is like, we're pretty much fine with that. We don't expect those things to happen as long as, but we need to know that's the first thing. Second thing is to pay their limited partner asset management fees or any unpaid limited partner asset management fees. So this is where there's accrual language that says okay, you didn't pay it this year, but next year you have to pay last year's and this year. So, and that's pretty typical of what they're going to require. The third is to the operating reserve, until the balance in the operating reserve equals what we started with, essentially. So this is saying if you're going to use your operating reserve one year because you had an operating deficit that year, the next year if you have more surplus, then we want you to put money back into it. That's also fairly standard. It means, you know, that year we might not get our asset management fee. But on the other hand, we're going to, you know, so but basically they want you to replenish in good years if you've had to take it out in bad years. Mm-hmm.
Can you explain that a little bit further? Earlier when we were talking about the guarantee, that you have to have at least that amount. So if,
right, but remember that's a guarantee. This is the reserve. So this is where we want to be able to use the reserve before we have to pay with our guarantee, i.e. our own money.
Right, but so when you were saying in a good year, so that, like, how are they connected? Is it that if you go 3 years and you still don't have a good year, at that point you have to, with your own money, replenish it?
Well, you would if, so yeah, under the terms of the operating deficit guarantee, our guarantee won't burn off if we don't meet the requirements. If not meeting the requirements meant we also had to take money out of the reserve to fund things, then we're going to keep doing that if we keep having deficits. But if we keep having deficits and then we have a surplus, we're going to have to use that surplus to fund the operating deficit guarantee until it gets back up to a certain amount. The reserve. Does that make sense?
Kind of. Like, I'm wondering is do they say, okay, you can't go more than 5 years without having something in your operating reserve, or at least, you know, whatever this amount equals?
No, it just means that if we deplete our operating reserve, then our guarantee kicks in.
Got it.
And then we
Okay.
have to fund it with our guarantee.
Got it.
So this really only comes in if we use it and then can replenish it, then have a surplus. Yeah. The next one be the payment of any loans provided to the investor limited partner. So there's provisions in here that says under certain circumstances where the limited partner could choose to make a loan to the partnership. So that's unlikely to happen, but that, you know, they're going to get repaid then. Then it's deferred developer fee. So if we have any deferred developer fee, it's going to, all the rest of the cash will go to pay off, you know, any deferred fee, and it's not going to get down to the rest of the waterfall. So that's one thing to remember is, you know, deferred developer fee gets paid first, and then we wouldn't pay a partnership management fee that year. And, you know, and we keep doing that until the deferred developer fee is paid off. And if that's not what we want to do, we want to negotiate something else. And that may come up on some of these 4% deals with big developer fees, where deferred developer fees, where we want to say that deferred developer fee is only payable sort of after we've paid our soft lenders their share of the residual receipts. So this could end up being an important distinction of when are you paying deferred developer fee. And tax counsel may have some opinions about that. Then to pay any deferred management fees owed to our affiliates. So this is where if we don't have enough money to pay, then we may choose, there may be a requirement in here that we not get our full management fee if there's an operating deficit. Here's where we can catch back up. And so, you know, that's after paying into the reserve. So these are the things that, this is all pretty typical, and I don't know that we would really be able to negotiate something different. Then to the general partner in the payment of GP asset management fee, that's what we call a partnership management fee, and any unpaid management fee. So again, if we haven't been able to pay ourselves in the past, this is where we get to catch up. So if we've been paying deferred fee, so we weren't getting a GP fee, then in subsequent years we can start paying the back fees. Then to the GP for repayment of any unpaid operating deficit loans. And then of this, then it's saying the remaining balance goes to paying all of these loans. Now, normally that you would think that would be 50% because we're trying to negotiate to have 50% go to the soft lenders. But the way this is written, you'll see the last one is 50% to the seller carryback loan. And that's where on this project we own the land already. We were able to do a seller carryback for the land, and we did that expressly for this purpose. Otherwise, we could have just donated the land at $1. We didn't get any benefit under TCAC for having a land donation. So we did this expressly so that we had a way to take the money and get it paid to a Mid-Penn entity, because payment of a loan doesn't trigger any tax issues. Okay? If that hadn't been there, then it would probably go to, we would have wanted to have seen something like an incentive management fee that would have been equal to 50%. But we probably couldn't have gotten that. They probably wouldn't have agreed to that here. And then it would have gone down to the last thing, which you see says 99.99% to the limited partner. So this is where on a 4% deal, that can say 90% to the GP and 10% to the limited partner. So that's one of the reasons why we would sometimes want to do the 40-year depreciation.
You said on a 4% deal because that's more common on the 4%, but some 9% deals could have 40-year depreciation.
You're right. Yeah, I shouldn't make the distinction that way. But that's why we might want to do 40-year depreciation. And we often are doing it anyhow on a 4% deal. Yeah.
Can you speak to how the housing type for the project may kind of affect these items? Because I know that that's something that we've been talking about for Chinatown, is that as an SRO project, you know, trying to negotiate so that the kind of pari passu distribution would not look that way. So that way you could possibly maintain as much of the cash flow towards the development rather than going back to our soft lenders. And I think that it's by the nature of the project that we're kind of considering that.
Yeah, so that would be something where you're really negotiating a lot of that in your soft loan documents, because of course this distribution of you know, payments to the residual receipts lenders isn't something that the investor really cares, you know, about. This is required under their loan documents. And so what we would want to be doing is negotiating something where they're not getting paid residual receipts, and instead the money is going to some other use. And so typically what we've done is had that go into some kind of services reserve or transition reserve. And so if that's what the soft loan documents say, then we can get that into this waterfall as well. And so then probably above where these soft loan payments come would be, you know, a deposit into the services reserve, you know, per what it says in the residual receipts documents. And then that would use up all the money, and it wouldn't flow down to the rest. So this is where the waterfall is very much needs to be thought of, both in the residual receipts loan documents and in the LPA documents.
Can I just make a plug for, because I'm cleaning it up now on Half Moon Village, but making sure that your waterfall in your LPA matches what is in all of your soft loan documents. Our ground lease doesn't specifically say that it's, although that was the intent, was that it's only 50% of the residual receipts, and of that 50%, then there's a split. It just kind of puts the split between the soft lenders. And so asset management's reading it saying that looks like they get 100% and we're splitting it. But our LPA very clearly says 50% would come to Mid-Penn. So we have to do an amendment to that ground lease to make that clear now. So just it's a reminder to check all of your documents to this.
Yeah. Really important in that, you know, like the escalators that are allowed and stuff. And I think asset management deals with this a lot, that there's kind of conflicts between them. And, you know, they theoretically don't have to be identical, but they can't be in conflict. You know, they can be, it just, what's going to be allowed under each needs to be the same. Then the other waterfall is what we call the back end waterfall. And this has to do with how proceeds of sale would get distributed. And so this matters a lot for the buyout. And I think the really important thing here is what's going to happen with money at the end. Because after we make these distributions, the issue is how do reserves get distributed at the back end. And there's sort of a lot of ways we try to deal with that. But one of them is this. And this is if you're going to use 40-year depreciation, then we want to make sure that, and this often gets missed, so I want to just emphasize this, that last one, we're allowed to get 90% of the back-end proceeds. So again, it would be 90% to the GP, 10% to the LP. And we can do that if we have 40-year depreciation. The other thing that messes all this up is solar credits. And if you have solar credits, you basically have to treat you, even if you're a 40-year depreciation property, you get treated like a 27.5-year depreciation property in terms of allocations. It requires, the other thing tax attorneys say, it requires qualified allocations. So when you have, if you're required to have qualified allocations, that's where, you know, your back end and the end of your cash flow has to match the partnership allocations. So 99.99. So solar credits trigger qualified allocations. So this can kind of mess everything up. So sometimes we've just elected not to take solar credits on some deals because it means that we can't get a 90% back end or cash flow distribution percentage. So keep that in mind also when we're when we're sending our projections out, that we've talked to our financial consultant about it, that this is, are we going to take these solar credits or not? It's something we can often add later or we can mess around with later, but it's often something we kind of forget to deal with right away, and we deal with it later, and it often works out, but just remember that. Any questions on that? Okay, so that, like I said, that's an area where I pay a lot of attention, and I'm your, you know, you aren't doing this alone, but it is a really good thing to be thinking about, and I want you to be equipped to be able to talk to your financial consultants about it, to be thinking about these issues. Oftentimes we don't need to think about these issues, you know, 2 years before we're starting construction. But again, you want to be thinking about it in the back of your mind, because something like Sequoia Belhaven, if we have an opportunity to structure the land transaction as a seller's carryback, that's beneficial for us. And there was no other reason to do that. Think through whether you have a way to do a cash trap that you can set in place. And sometimes if we have anything we can set up as a loan to the property because we're contributing something, that's a good way to do it. Okay, now we are going to get into some serious stuff.
Alice, you're not going to cover incentive management fees right now?
Oh, well, so, okay, yeah, sorry. So back to incentive management fees. So on a 9% deal, if we want to try to structure that 50% of cash flow that's coming to the borrower as an incentive management fee to us, there's been 9% deals or deals with solar credits, because this is where we have qualified allocations. This is where, if there's qualified allocations, tax attorneys aren't very comfortable with having incentive management fees at all. And this is going to vary by investor. If we have an investor who, some investors are okay with doing one, but they're going to require that it be capped. And sometimes what we're going to be looking at is how much cash flow is there, and is it going to exceed that cap? And under what conditions would it exceed that cap? Because, so let's say we were just talking about it on Alma Point. On there's a $25,000 incentive management fee allowed, even though it is a 9% deal. And I think if it's a 9% deal with solar credit, we probably wouldn't even have gotten that. But they put a $25,000 cap on it, going up at 3% a year. So the question is, if we have more cash flow than that, that's our 50% portion, then whatever over that cap is going to go 99.99% to the LP. There's not much we can do about that, except switch to 40-year depreciation. If we don't think we're ever, so the issue there is negotiating a cap amount that we think is going to be high enough, even if we have 0% vacancy or, you know, other things happen. And that's pretty hard to do. We've been fairly successful with Union. Union has been pretty easy on some of these issues. of getting kind of a bigger cap. But on like Wells, now they're not going to give us a bigger cap than what we're showing in the projections with a 5% vacancy, basically. So this becomes an issue, and where sometimes we might want to switch to 40-year depreciation if we can afford to be able to take advantage of cash flow that isn't in the projections, but we think we might have. So, yeah. Well, no, so what we're doing on Alma Point is actually, wait, the Point or Place? When I said Point, it sounded wrong. Point, okay.
Alma Point, yeah.
Thank you. For some reason, it just sounded wrong. What we're doing there is we're actually doing it now, post-completion. We're renegotiating it. But you have to do it before you file your first tax return, because that's when you set your depreciation schedule in place. So because we have a big surplus on Alma Point, we're saying, can we switch to 40-year depreciation? You can give us less equity. And they're going to be willing to do that in this case, I think. But so it is something you could do later. And so I think we've done it as an explicit sort of decision on a few projects. I think on St. Stephen's too, right? We kind of decided to punt it and say, well, if we have savings in the end, we'll renegotiate it at that point.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah, Matt?
Generally, you can't get more equity right after the LOI has been finalized.
Well, everything's negotiable, but you should assume that you can't negotiate a better price afterwards. Yeah. But we can get more equity through adjusters by delivering more credit. But the ability to negotiate a better price, it certainly has been done before. Suddenly you get a construction big bids back and it's a bust, and you have no way to do it. Sometimes we've gone back to investors and said, okay, we just need you to be a partner here and do better, and that may or may not be successful, but there's nothing that says you can't ask.
Yeah. Alice, I have a question. So if going to 40-year depreciation, is it truly that the cap on the incentive management fee is lifted, or is it merely that the cash we get, that cap is lifted because the actual cash flow distribution is changed from us getting 0.01% to us getting 90%, or is it both?
Well, it'll depend on what the investor decides to do. Sometimes they've still gone ahead and structured it as an incentive management fee with a cap, and then the distribution becomes 90% to us, and so we get whatever's over the cap, 90% of that. And sometimes they've just taken out the incentive management fee altogether, and it's all distributions, and we get 90% of that. Okay. That's kind of a tax issue, which way they do it.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. They kind of like to do the fee because fees are expensible, so it's more losses.
Hey, Alice?
Yeah.
If the lender isn't really in the deal for the cash, why do they care how high these fees get? Like, why can't we just jack it up as high?
It's the investor. Just remember.
Right, the investor.
Because of tax issues. Because if the fees get too high, then the IRS could say that we don't have qualified allocations, and therefore the investor does not get 99.99% of the tax benefits. And then we have a big adjuster to pay. We have a guarantee on providing those credits. So that would be very bad for us if the IRS basically said, no, they actually only get 90% of the credits, because that's sort of more what the real economic value of this partnership is. Yeah. So that's the big risk, and that's why investors and their tax counsel are so concerned about these issues and why they really drive these issues. Okay, so we're going to get to the buyout provisions, and let's see, it's 11 o'clock. This stuff is really complicated, and so what I want to do here is to just kind of cover this kind of from making sure you understand the language, making sure you understand the concepts, making sure sort of from a project manager perspective what you need to know. This is going to be something where where me and your attorney and our internal partners are all going to be looking at these as well. So you don't have to feel like you need to be the expert on this, but it's good for you to understand the terms and the concepts, and to be able to read one of these and try to make sense of it. So the first thing all the back end is about is when can we get the limited partner out of our deal. And typically, we're going to get the limited partner out after the 15-year federal recapture period is over. Sometimes what we want to try to do is get them out earlier than that, but the earliest we could ever get them out is after the credit period has ended. So that's going to be basically starting in year 12. Because year 11, they're almost certainly going to be getting some credits in year 11 as well, because the first year is a partial year. So usually the earliest we could get them out is year 12, and then, but typically we would get them out starting sometime in year 16. And what we want to do is to set up these arrangements up front that are going to allow us to buy back either their limited partnership interest or the project without having to give them any cash. That's the goal. And sometimes we can set it up that it looks like that's going to work. And again, the limited partner they're okay with this. And this is the time to do it. They're okay with that concept. That problem happens when you get to year 16 and there is cash they can get, then of course they want it. But they're willing to say that they don't want it in year 1. So, at the time we're negotiating is when we want to get things really in place so that in year 16 they can't say, well, yeah, I guess under our documents we really are allowed to have that. So of course we're going to take it if we're allowed. It gets harder to negotiate it then. And the other part of this is just that we're under this sort of tax law, again, that doesn't allow them to agree up front that they're going to let us get sort of a free deal at the back end, except under one circumstance. And so they can't legally agree to sell it to us, for below market value, except under our except under the for real, otherwise known as the right of first refusal. But I'm now going to call it a for real. So this is where we want to get the language and the deal as airtight as we can so that in year 16 it's really clear what's going to happen. They aren't tempted to try to screw us. So one of the first things we want to do is know, is this project going to have value in year 16? And that's one of the things where if a project is going to have real value, there's going to be more problems. If the project doesn't have any value, then that's going to be, we're going to have less issues to worry about. So one of the things in this term sheet I'm having you put in here that information so that we're having to think about it. Do we think this is going to be a project that has value? So the way that you fill this out is pretty easy on our pro forma. So we're going to look at Sequoia Belhaven. On the debt sizing tab, there's a little calculation that calculates both the debt that we expect, the debt value that we expect will happen in year 15. I have this set up for year 15. I should probably do it really for year 16. And then, but it's kind of the end of year 15 is where really this is sort of what it's aimed at. And what we think the expected value of the property would be. And so the issue here is to the extent that the debt on the property exceeds what it's worth, then the property has net negative value, right? And we're going to, under a lot of these things, what matters is does the debt, if fair market value exceeds the debt on it, we're going to end up having to pay cash, potentially, versus if it's just debt, we're going to buy it by just assuming the existing debt on the property. That makes sense to everybody? Because that's kind of an important concept. Any questions?
Yeah, but isn't it a hard concept?
Sorry, isn't it a hard concept
to budget for because a lot of the value is also driven by the market at the time, and that's for the land?
Good point. Yeah, good point. So first of all is calculating what the debt is, and so this ties into a tab, the loan balances tab, which is here. So you might need to actually go and check to make sure that this is all, moving over correctly. So, these are things in green, which means like it's tying into the sources in the sources and uses, but depending on what you have in your sources, it might not have tied in correctly. So you need to double check this and make sure it's set up correctly. But it's all set up there for you to just, as long as you get the right source linked, then it should be fine. So it's linking the source and the interest rate. If you have a compound interest rate loan that's an AFR, you're going to have to change these formulas because this is calculating simple interest. You need to know how to do that, I can tell you. So this is sort of setting this all up of what the loan balances will be in year 15, and then that goes over into your back into the debt sizing tab, and it has them all there. So again, you're going to need to double check to see that they all show up. This is all set up, but it doesn't mean it's going to be right unless you check it. So we think that the projected debt in year 15 is going to be about $16 million. And that should be a pretty good calculation, right? We kind of know what those schedules should be right. The analysis of value is a much more, subjective thing. So what this does is it takes what your net operating income is in year 15 and applies a cap rate to it. And cap rates are market driven. So what your cap rate in year 16 is going to be, we don't know. That's a reflection of the real estate market at the time. But it calculates different cap rates. Right now today, what would you say, Peter, 4.5 or 5%? We might be saying it is. So let's say it's 5%. This is the default here that puts it at 5%, but it's just choosing that one, but you can choose a different one. But it gives you a range of values, so you can kind of say, okay, well, if it was 5%, then the value is a little bit below debt. So I don't know what the cap rate is going to be. If the cap rate's 4.5%, then the value is more than debt. You also don't really know if your NOI in year 15 is correct, right? Because that's based on a lot of assumptions. So this is a way of, it might not give you the answer. It might give you a sense. It might say, what I take from this is, value and debt are pretty close here. It could be that value is going to exceed debt in year 16. So I'll really want to make sure. There's a good chance we're going to be buying this using our ROFR, which we're going to talk about in a second. And so this is information here to kind of think about what the strategy is and what's a likely outcome. So I put in the, I sent to you guys in that email something I had written up for a conference that talked about some of our experience on the back end and what that has led to in terms of what we want to do using that knowledge for our front end and what we want to negotiate now. So some of this is written in there. I also intended but didn't get to it was for the next development committee meeting, we Peter and I had put together a memo that explains a lot of the basic terms here, and it was aimed more at buyout, but the same terms apply at the front end. So I can try to send that out to everybody, or maybe Peter could, because it gives a little bit of a primer on all of these terms and documents. So that might be a good thing to try to read in the next couple of days while your mind is thinking about it. So under the things as a project manager that I think are really important to remember are to really make some distinctions as you're reading this about, so first of all, we're going to think about what the back-end issues are. So one of them is value going to exceed debt. Another is, are there exit taxes projected? Do we think that if the buyout price is debt plus the limited partner's exit taxes, do we think the limited partner is going to have exit taxes? So let's look at that for a second. And the reason, and I'm not going to go into a big explanation here, the reason there would be exit taxes is because the limited partner's capital account goes negative before the buyout. And so we can look at that and see that in the projections. And again, it's going to be in either CHPCs or CIs, and it's the capital account analysis during ownership. So this is an important thing to look at to see how the capital accounts end up in year 15. And it's a big issue. Tends to be a much bigger issue on 4% deals because 4% deals have less equity in them and their capital accounts go negative sooner. So on Sequoia Belhaven, what you're going to look at is you're looking at the capital account here, and this one doesn't. Some of them have instead of tax benefits or losses on sale as the final line, it actually says taxes, exit taxes as a final line. This one doesn't, but so we'll have to look at it in a different way. So the end of the year capital account, you can see, is positive, 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 positive. It's ending at $5 million, $4 million. So this is not a project where we have any risk of having to pay exit taxes. So right off the bat, that's something I'm not going to negotiate for, care about too much. On other projects, it's a big deal, and you'll see a negative number here. When that's the case, or here, that there's going to be exit taxes owed. So it's becoming a big issue on our 4% Act rehab deals because with the drop in equity pricing, capital accounts are going negative soon, and they're going very negative by the end. So that on 8 trees, we were looking at $1 million exit tax liability in year 15. So that's an important thing to know when you're thinking about all this. Is that the situation my project is in? So,
and Alice, can you negotiate with your investor to have them pay the taxes?
You absolutely can, and you know when it's really easy to negotiate that? It's when you don't think there's going to be any exit taxes. So yeah, I know that's what this option agreement says on Sequoia Belhaven. It's nice. It's not really worth anything to us because there aren't going to be any. But on projects, it is possible when we're projecting that there will be an exit tax. That's when we need to get creative about other things. And when everybody was clamoring for all our deals, we were able to negotiate that out of some deals where exit taxes were projected. We probably aren't going to be able to do that in this market. So it's very much, going to be how much negotiating power do we have? So I just want to make sure we kind of get to the basics of this, which is kind of explaining what sort of a right of first refusal is versus an option agreement. Because when you're looking at the language in this, it gets really confusing. And what I've seen project managers get confused about is making a distinction between the terms under the ROFR and the terms under the option agreement, and a distinction between the right to buy the limited partner interest versus buying the project. So do people kind of understand?
Alice, you've got a little quieter. Can you hold the mic closer?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was waving my arms around. So when in year 16, when we buy back, we think of like we're buying the project. But buying the project means now the owner of the project is going to be a different owner. The limited partnership is no longer going to own it. It's going to be a different entity that owns it. And to do that, that means that it's a transfer of the grant deed to a new owner. There could be transfer taxes involved. I mean, there probably is transfer taxes involved. It also means that all of the loans on the project need to get assumed by the new owner. You have to get approvals for all those assumptions. So there's a lot of more hassle involved in buying the project. If you buy the limited partner interest, we become the limited partner. And that means the owner doesn't change. It's still the same limited partnership, but now we're the limited partner. And we don't need to change, assume all the debt and everything. We still have to go get some approvals from investors and from soft lenders, but that's a much different level than really assuming it and changing ownership. So exactly, yeah. So it's just an easier way to do it. So that's another distinction to make as you're looking at this, because what we really want to do is have the right to buy the limited partnership interest. So let's talk about what an option is versus a right of first refusal. So an option, well, let's just start with the right of first refusal. Let's start with the option. Change my mind. Okay, So what an option is it says that we agree that in year 16 you have the right to buy the property. And here's the terms under which you can buy it, or to buy the limited partnership interest. And the terms under which you can buy it, by law, cannot be less than fair market value. And this is sort of just tax law. That, again, it's because they want this thing to have an economic, this needs to be an economically justifiable partnership, otherwise it's a tax shelter. So it can't be less than fair market value. So what the price under the option agreement is going to be, generally speaking, the greater of debt or fair market value. And usually when it's debt, it's going to be debt plus exit taxes. So that means that if the property has value in excess of debt, then that's going to be the higher amount. And since it's more than debt, it means that there's going to have to be the difference between the debt that we're going to assume and the fair market value is cash that we have to come up with to buy it back. Does that make sense to everybody?
Will you give an example of a property where?
Sure. So if the property ends up being worth $10 million, and it being worth is a whole big issue right there. But let's say we have an appraisal that is worth $10 million and there's $8 million of debt on it. Then, and let's say there's $500,000 of exit taxes. Then now debt plus taxes is $8.5 million. Fair market value is $10 million. To buy it, we're going to have to come up with another, over that $8 million, we're going to have to come up with $2 million to buy back this property. And so we'd either have to refinance the property to get the money out of it or put up our own money. But we have to put up real cash to get that. If instead it was the other way around and it was worth $8 million, but the debt on it was $10 million, then, and there's $500,000 of exit taxes, then the higher amount is debt plus taxes, which is $10.5 million. We can buy it by assuming the $10 million of debt, and we're going to have to come up with cash of $500,000 to pay the exit taxes, the investor's exit taxes. Does that make sense? Any questions on that? I want to make sure you understand that concept. And so, then there's a whole bunch of issues within the option. So the thing we like about options is that we can get an option to either buy the interest or the property. And we always want to make sure in our option we have both of those options available to us. Honestly, if we have the interest, I'm not sure when we would ever buy the property if we could buy the interest, but we want both anyhow. So that's going to be, as you're looking what the price is under that, be making these distinctions. If you're buying the, whereas if we have a property that's going to have a lot of value, then we're probably going to want to try to buy it under the right of first refusal. And actually, I keep forgetting to say the really for real. And so the reason what the ROFR is this is a special exception that does allow them to agree to sell it to us for less than fair market value. It's only available to nonprofits, and it's sort of a special exception under the code. So we can get a ROFR. We always want to have a ROFR, and that is going to be especially important if we think the property really does have a lot of value, is going to have value in excess of debt. Then we're certainly going to want to trigger our ROFR to buy it that way. The reason we want to have all of these is because we want to have multiple options. The problems with the right of first refusal is how does it get triggered? And so when it gets triggered, there's a lot of language that we've run into in the past that we want to avoid like the plague, and that we have been successful in avoiding in all of the documents we've been negotiating in the last number of years. And one of those is that the limited partner can't have the right to approve us, to either approve a sale in advance to say we can use the ROFR if but we have to approve that we're selling it. We don't want to have them to have any rights to approve things that would limit our ability to trigger the ROFR. And one of the things we run into is that, so normally what a right of first refusal means is if somebody else offers to buy it, then I get the right to buy it at the price that they offered. And that's not what this is, and it's really a misnomer to call it a right of first refusal, which is why it makes sense to call it a right for real, or whatever it was, really for real, because it's really not a right of first refusal. It's what it is it's a below market sales option. So it says if somebody else agrees, says, hey, I want to buy that, here's an offer, then it triggers for us the right to buy it at debt. The issues are all around triggering the ROFR, and what does it take for us to then have that right. So we don't want to have any, lots of times it'll say we have to have received a bona fide offer. We don't really know what bona fide means. That's language we have gotten out of a number of them, but we haven't been able to get it out of Wells's. So we're living with it. We want to make sure that the option period, that both the option and the right of first refusal periods are long enough to make sense. So that's all written down in here of what it is we're looking for in terms of those periods of time. We're going to look at to really scrutinize what the language is for the purchase price, that it makes sense. Then we're, the thing about the ROFR is that it doesn't allow us, because it's sort of the special exception under law, it doesn't allow us to get a ROFR to purchase the limited partnership interest. It's only for the property. And so that's one of the reasons, and at the time of buyout, we can negotiate anything we want then. Then it doesn't, the tax law stuff doesn't really matter then. It's just all about what you can agree to up front. And so Peter's done a great job of being able to, under some ROFRs, to still buy the limited partnership interest. They can agree to do that at that point. But we want to have as many different options here as we can. So okay, any questions on all that? Yeah, Chris.
Since we use the cap rate to determine the value, is like an outside appraisal needed at all for the value of the property, and does that factor in make any difference at all?
It makes a huge difference, and it is required at the time of buyout if we're going to use our option. And it's not required. What we're doing up front by looking at the numbers in our pro forma is just a way for us to estimate and to plan and be strategic about it. It's nothing official. It's just saying what might it be and what position would that put us in. Because sometimes you look at it, it's like value is, half of debt, and you're like, okay, this just isn't going to be a problem on this project. And others, you're like, okay, this is much closer. This is one where we could run into value issues. But absolutely, in year 16, the appraisal becomes a very important and an important part of negotiating the value. And that's where we've run into a lot of issues and contentions with appraisers, with investors about how property should be appraised, particularly things like, should you assume that property taxes are going to be owed with a new owner? Should you assume Section 8 is continued? Should you assume things? A lot of things that affect value a lot. So that's another big thing in the option agreement that we want to get is very clear language about appraisal, how appraisals are done, who does them, and to try to keep the process relatively simple. What we want to have ideally is we get to pick a list of 3 appraisers, give it to the LP, and they pick one. We are unsuccessful at doing that with bank investors because they already have a bunch of appraisers, and they always want to use their list and then let us choose. So that's kind of what we've had to agree to on a number of things on those. But I think we could kind of go through a lot of the detail of this or not. I'm kind of feeling at the moment like we won't go through all of the detail, but I think the thing is that there's a lot of this written in this term sheet that tells you the things to look for. The problem is understanding what the hell those documents say. I find them exceedingly difficult to understand and very confusing. I wish they were written in English instead of Parseltongue. And the thing to know about this is that with investors we've worked with in the past, we've already done extensive negotiations with them on these documents. And so part of it is really looking at how it's redlined against the last document to make sure they didn't make some big change, and making sure that, you know, that you've checked in with, that I've looked at it, that our council's looked at it. And it'd be great on every one of them if you could try to understand them and think about what it means and how we might buy this back. But it's also something where we've, you know, gotten a lot of these already put into there. Every time we could try to get something else, though, that we haven't gotten in the past. Let's see. I think one of the other issues that come up is if we think there's going to be an exit tax liability, then one of the things we want to do is to try to negotiate an early buyout, to buy it out in year 12 before the exit taxes keep getting larger. Because remember, if we end up having to buy it at debt plus taxes, which we would do under the ROFR, or if that's less than the value of the property, then we're going to have to pay these taxes unless we can negotiate them out of the price. So one way to do that is to try to buy it back before the taxes get larger. So that's where we try to negotiate an early buyout. That's something we would be looking at the projections. And that's a great thing to put in when we send in, if we're going to try in the first initial negotiations with the investor, that's when we try to get that, when we have more negotiating leverage. Yeah.
Can you just go back to, again, why they can exit in year 12? I know they collected credits for 10 years, but I thought the 15 years compliance is that they have to stay in for 15 years.
They don't have to stay in. It's a 15-year recapture period. So if there were, if we mess up during the last 4 years, then the credits from the previous years can get recaptured by the IRS. And so because of that, they usually want to stay in to have some level of control or to have a warning if some things are going off the rails. So that's why they usually stay in and want to stay in. And so that's the default. And doing an early buyout means that they're going to want guarantees from us if that happens, which they already have. They kind of want extra guarantees and sort of indemnities around it. And so because we can provide those, I think we're probably more successful at getting a 12-year option on some of these than maybe smaller nonprofits. Yeah, that's the answer. Yeah, Nasreen.
So do we start looking at like year 8 at the numbers to try to figure out if there's going to be taxes or?
Yeah, that's something we're monitoring all along.
Sorry if I missed this basic question, but are the option and the ROFR essentially independent triggers for the purchase, or do they supplement each other?
They're independent.
Okay,
and
just two different paths you can take to actually do the transfer.
You do one or the other, and you can make that decision at the time. Yeah, Allison.
I don't know if this question is particularly relevant, or maybe I should ask you this afterwards, but what is the context, as someone who just sees like the front end, you purchase, you pay the taxes, and this is coming out of mid-pen, or like, and then it goes on to resyndicate? Like what kind of?
So there's a lot of things if we buy back, are you kind of saying what happens after we buy back the property? So we can buy it back and just run it, right? And then the decision becomes, is there something that needs to happen to the property? Does it have a loan coming due we need to refinance? Does it have a lot of deferred maintenance? We need to do capital improvements. And that's what Peter and his team do, is figuring that out and what are all the different solutions we can use to solve those problems. And depending if there's big capital needs at the property, that's when we would probably resyndicate to be able to raise enough more money to do a big rehab. Maybe we don't have to. Maybe our reserves are good. Maybe we can go get a little NOFA money from a city and just do a rehab that way. So it's looking at each project individually. Yeah. Yeah, Matt.
Is the option still kind of like our preferred way of doing the buyback and like the ROFR is sort of like a last resort.
Well,
we changed our thinking on ROFRs.
I think that we've had ROFRs in the past that have been either not written, with the best language, or that have been where we felt like to trigger it, we really had to go through an extensive process. And in that case, we would only do that if we really felt that that was we needed to because the project has value, and we've been doing that, and we've been successful, and we've got now more of a track record of that. But the option allows us to just go on some projects. That's just the easier route because it doesn't have value. We have maybe we have clear rights under it to buy the LP interest. It might be a lot more straightforward. So it's going to depend, and I think what's going to happen is a lot of these earlier buyouts, we didn't have the best language. The language wasn't always great. Now that we're going to be entering into more of a period where we have much better language in these documents, we might find that some of this works a little differently. And I think we feel more confident that we're going to be able to use our ROFRs in 15 years and that they're going to work. But that's still where we want to have as many options as we can. Yeah, Helen.
Hey, Alex.
Someone talking?
Could you explain exit taxes? Yeah, this is Carlos. I had a question about exit taxes. How are those calculated?
So you have to look at the capital accounts, and to the extent that the capital accounts are less than zero, they basically owe tax on that amount that's negative. So if they've gone to minus 500,000, they have you kind of calculated it. They're going to have $500,000 of. I always get this confused. I guess that's gain or is it loss? It never makes sense to me, so I can't remember which way you say it. But anyhow, that's $500,000 that they owe taxes on at the end. So you would multiply that times the corporate tax rate. And then because you're actually paying the money, they owe tax on the income, on the money you paid them because that's income. So the price is called grossing it up. And now you have to increase your purchase price to cover the amount of taxes they owe on what you're paying them. So it ends up being something like 45% of that negative capital account balance. That's just a rough estimate. Yeah.
So Alex, my question was regarding your distinction between buying the project versus the LP interest. So you alluded to the fact that we typically buy both, but in a situation where you just buy the project, is there a situation where you just buy the project and not the interest?
Well, I think if we have the right, so one thing is this, under the ROFR, we may only be able to, if we're using the ROFR, we might have to buy the project because we don't get the option to do the interest under a ROFR, which is one reason why we might want to use the option so we have the right to buy the interest. I'm not sure if we have the right to buy the interest if there's ever a reason to purchase the project. I think there maybe isn't, but we still get them both anyhow. Yeah, I'm not sure the answer to that. Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit more about the capital account that's leading to if you're going to be in the negative or positive that then plays into the exit taxes?
Yeah.
Could you give us just a
sure.
that I went to where that Joel led? I'd love for you to help explain it.
Okay.
Just how this works, because from my understanding, at least what Joel was alluding to, we can be monitoring that also up to like year 10, where now it's going to be affected, that if you can get ahead of it to prevent that gain or loss.
You would make changes to your, you would make changes or do things that are going to change the way it's projected.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I'd rather not get into all that right now. It's kind of a whole another issue. But, your capital account goes negative if your capital account starts out with the amount of LP equity paid in, and every year you take off from that the losses that they're allocated. And so if that gets down to zero, they have to stop taking losses unless there's minimum gain. But minimum gain is the extent to which the debt on the property exceeds the basis in the property. So on some properties that'll happen, and if there's minimum gain, they can keep taking losses. That's when it goes negative. It's going to happen most often on 4% deals because they have less equity, so their starting capital account balances are lower. So you really need to pay attention on 4% deals. It can also happen on 9% deals where we've done, a huge voluntary basis reduction, so we're not actually getting all that many credits. So you need to look at it there to see what your capital account balances are. It's going to happen more on properties that are much lower targeted because they have less income, and there's going to be more losses as a result.
So essentially, when it goes negative, it's saying that the investor is getting more benefit than they should have, and therefore they owe taxes.
Exactly. That's exactly the concept. Yeah. Yeah. So it's just something where, and sometimes we need them to go negative because we need to keep being able to take credits. It gets pretty complicated, and so the really important thing is whether you think you're going to end up with exit taxes when you're starting this process, and before you even start negotiating, that you're negotiating these things, understanding that. Okay. The other issue that really comes up is if you have a lot of reserves, and how do we hold on to reserves at the end? And this is another really tricky issue because the reserves are owned by the partnership. They're a separate asset from the property itself. They sort of own the property and they own the cash that goes with the property. And what it means is that the cash can get distributed. Even if we buy the property for debt, we may have to distribute the cash reserves. Even if they're restricted by lenders and we need to have them, it means distributing means that we have to give them cash and we still have to, re-put the money back in the reserves. So that's another big issue of how do reserves get handled on this. If you have a property that has big reserves in it, we really want to pay close attention to that. There's sort of a number of ways we can try to do that. So in the thing I wrote up that I sent you, there's some issues around that. Trying to keep, if we buy the partnership interest, the reserves belong to the partnership. So we're buying the partnership interest and the reserves together. So that's often one of the good solutions is to buy the partnership interest. I think one of the things that we often haven't had the right to buy the partnership interest in our earlier documents. So even if we end up buying the partnership interest, it's all calculated as though we were buying the property, which means the reserves go separately. We still do that from an economic point of view. So I think I'm going to leave it at that. And I want you to just have, an idea of all these concepts, what the issues are, what to be looking for, so that when it comes up on your deal, we can talk about it more. Does that sound good, or do you guys have more questions? More questions is fine. That's it? Okay. So that's a big area of negotiation. Then we get into reserves. And that's another area that we really want to be, I think maybe I ran out of time on the slides. I don't think I have a slide for that. We'll see. Oh yeah, so I kind of, for the rest of these things, I don't have any slides. But reserves, there's a lot of information here about what we're looking for. So on the operating reserve, the question is, how big of a reserve is it? And again, we're going to send our numbers out with a certain number in it. They're usually going to match it. But this may be another area where as the market changes, they're going to start requiring more capitalized reserves. From their perspective, that's good. It reduces their risk. So if they can get away with it, they're going to want more reserves. We also want spend down plans on the reserves. And what this is for is because of these back-end issues of the reserves potentially having to get distributed to them, we want to have the ability to spend them down in the last 18 to 24 months prior to buyout, so that we can spend them on good things for the project so that we don't have to distribute it to them, so we can keep them in the project. So that's part of our sort of belts and suspenders of making sure we have a lot of options of how to deal with this stuff. So we've negotiated the spend down language, I think, in all of the major investments, with all the major investors we have. It sometimes gets a little confusing when you're also talking about trying to keep reserves that are going to survive past the partnership period for sure, like services or transition reserves that we're funding now to use past year 15. We don't want to spend those down. We want to keep them. That's when it gets trickier. So there's language there. It's also about being able to use, under what conditions we get to use the operating and replacement reserves. On the location of the reserves, they almost always want to, if it's a bank, they want to hold them. And we have our corporate accounts at Union Bank. So if the Union deal is not a problem. If it's anything else, we want to minimize the number of accounts that we have to put at Wells or B of A. It's usually not a problem. But usually the thing is just say all accounts to be held, all project accounts to be held at B of A or Wells, and we have to negotiate that. Any questions on reserves and spend down plans? Okay. And then we get into a lot of this stuff now. Once we get into reporting requirements and toward the end, this is where this is stuff. The stuff we've covered so far is almost all in the LOI, and all you would fill out at the LOI stage. Now we're getting into things that are more likely to be in the LPA, though we do want in the LOI something around reporting requirements, and this is important to accounting and to asset management about when things are due. We want things to be due within a time frame that we can live with. So these are going to be annual audits and reports that are due. So this is important and something that when we send to our internal partners, I know they look at. But we have a standard here that we need to get. Okay. And we want to make sure it's really clear. And so there's also things around when operating budgets are due, unaudited financial statements, audited financial statements. So I don't think we need to go into the detail of what all that is. It's all clearly laid out here. Then there's a lot of things that starts to get into indemnification, powers, insurance provisions, dispute resolutions, things like this. These are things that are very much within, in my opinion, sort of within the realm of our counsel that we're using, that we're really relying on them to make sure this is all right. When it gets reviewed internally, if Lance does review it, then he's going to be looking at these things as well. These are things he cares about. So these are things, though, that you're going to make sure that your attorney is paying attention to this stuff. And then there's this says related documents. So there's a bunch of agreements in the equity documents that are going to be separate and not part of the partnership agreement. They usually call them the ancillary documents, and those are many. And the ones that are really, so here they're listed, and the ones that are most particularly important, I think I have a slide on this. Let's see. So anyhow, the development fee agreement, the asset management fee agreement, the guarantee, the right of first refusal, and the purchase option are all in separate documents, and they're really important. So don't forget that you're really reviewing those for terms as well. Some of them, I'm not saying the others aren't important, but they're a little bit less financial terms and a little bit more legal terms. So that is kind of the big things there. So just a few things about when you're reviewing an LPA, which can seem really overwhelming if you're a project manager. There's a lot of stuff in there. So one of the things that's really important for you guys to do is that you're really reviewing it for facts. There's a lot of facts about your project there that you know better than anybody, and you need to make sure they're correct, because there's a lot of times they're not. They don't get correctly put in there. One of the things to really look at is the part of the partnership agreement that's the GP reps, the representations, and they usually come under two different sections. I forget what the two different sections would be called, but read those and see if they're true, because sometimes they're not. And sometimes we don't want, we can't represent something that's not true. So make sure to flag those if they don't fit your project. If it says, you're guaranteeing that there's not any, commercial income, no commercial in the property, and you have commercial, then that's wrong. You got to fix that kind of thing. Another thing you really need to be looking at is the numbers, but the numbers are going to change in the agreement until we get final numbers. So at the beginning, it's not so important Though if you see numbers in there that seem just way off, it might indicate that it's not just the numbers haven't been updated, but something's really wrong, you know. Your financial consultant should be checking them and signing off on them at the end, but it's also something where you are more intimately familiar with the project than anybody, so make sure to, in the end, that those are right. And really look at the dates. There's a lot of things in there that have to be delivered by certain times. What sometimes happens is the project gets delayed a couple months and the dates never get updated. And then we're held to some date that doesn't make sense. So, you know, look at it, remember to re-review them if they change, and to think about, do they match the schedule? Can we deliver on it? If it's something that should have a cushion in it, does it have enough cushion in it? So those are all important. Another just comment is when we get documents, they'll usually give us a red line document that's been redlined off of the previous project that we did with that investor. So one thing is just to make sure they're redlining off a document, a deal that was similar enough. And usually they do that well. It's usually not an issue. But so this is a really good way to be able to review documents to see if they deviated from the terms we got in a previous project. So that is a really good way to do it. Sometimes what happens, though, I know I do it sometimes as I'm reviewing, I'm just kind of looking at the red lines, what changed, and you can get in trouble that way. You really got to remember to look at the whole thing, not just, it's a good visual clue that, oh, something changed from, you know, did they change the deal terms on us from what we got before, that I need to really think about it. But you also need to look at everything. That's just a caution. Let's see. Oh, this is where I was talking about the ancillary documents. We already talked about them. And then just a couple of sort of things to think about is, I think, you know, part of your, you know, you're part of a team. You've got other people doing this. You're not the expert on this. It's sort of tempting to think they're just taking care of everything, but you're the glue that holds it all together, and you're the one that ultimately needs to make sure everything gets followed up on. So there are sometimes it gets pretty confusing. There's comments flying every which way, and your attorney should be following up on all that, and probably they will. But you know, you've got comments coming from everywhere, and you're the glue that holds that all together. So you have to take responsibility for making sure that things get addressed, ultimately addressed. It's pretty easy for things to fall through the cracks. And I'd say some of the things, you know, where that really comes important is at the end. And on a partnership agreement, since it's not recorded, it's actually possible to change pages later. And so know that you can always correct a mistake later, but you have to remember to do it. And you also need to make sure your financial consultant is giving, you know, is updating the numbers if there's been a delay. The things are all getting trued up at the end when things are most hectic, and it's easiest to let something fall through the cracks. Okay? And just remember, you have a lot of expert guidance on all of this from different parties. So make use of it. Don't be afraid to ask questions. You're not on your own here. Okay? Questions? Yes, Susan.
This is more of an announcement. So since we've been going through the term sheet, it is one of our goals to, for the new database, to be able to produce the term sheets. That's one of our phase 2 goals. So probably by like Q3, that is something that we can look forward to, because I know that right now a lot of people, everyone is producing, like manually producing the term sheets.
Right.
Is that how it is?
Right. Yeah, I think we'll have to talk about that, whether for this particular term sheet that's going to make sense. It may, or maybe it'll fill in some things but not others, depending what, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, well that's something to look forward to.
Okay.
You would put in, you know, you would put in the payment, you'd put in the timing. The question is, will there be enough information that goes into the database that gives people reviewing the term sheet enough?
Yeah, I would think probably not, but we'll have to talk about that as part of it.
Yeah, that's something we're going to try to work towards, at least to produce like a basic one. So it's less work.
Okay. Okay, got another gift card. We're going to have another acronym. This time it is LOI. You guys crack me up. Save paper. Oh.
I would rather keep it all intact.
Oh, I just want to point out that Peter, Peter did provide some comments here on buyout stuff. So I'm sorry, Peter, I hadn't seen these as we were going because I had it minimized. So sorry about that, Peter. I would have brought attention to these if I'd seen them. So thank you for sending that out. So yes, obviously Peter knows very much about this, and as he says, he's available as a resource to answer questions on buyout language as well. So thank you, Peter. You guys, I'll look at my text this time, so feel free to text. Only 3 words left.